We will be looking today at 5 steps to enhancing your conversation design process. If you start with the bare minimum of making sure that the conversation flows, you can then improve on it. Step 2, create a personality, not just the system persona. Design your system persona to be helpful, not human. When writing the sample dialogue, we try to think of what is the setting of this conversation that is about to happen. I say every year will always be the year for conversational AI. Now, even more than before.